What is it really like to go to prison? This is Christina Williams with Just Criminal Law.
And David Mann, legal storytelling specialist. Yeah, this is one of those things that I think we sort of see depicted a lot, and we think we might know what happens with going to prison, but what happens, like, say, from the point of getting sentenced? What's the next thing that happens after that?
When somebody is sentenced, and we're talking about a felony sentencing, and they're sentenced to go to prison, they typically leave the courtroom in handcuffs, and they're taken to the back of the courtroom and processed into a van and taken over to the local county jail, where they get checked in, they get fingerprinted, and they are booked, so to speak. And then they wait for their paperwork from the attorneys, and once that paperwork's signed, that's when they will start the process of going to prison.
Okay, so then are they brought to a cell with other inmates, or does it, I think somewhere I read something about there being like a dorm room or something like that. So what's the difference in all those scenarios?
Sure. They are at the county jail while they wait to be transported to the prison. They will have a cellmate. They share basically sleeping quarters, and they have a small area to hold their personal items that they're allowed to have in their cell. And then, while they wait to go to prison, they can also set up communication if they have money to put on their books.
Okay, so they have the ability to communicate with the outside world, or does that depend on the level of their sentencing?
No, generally inmates, as long as they're not being punished, have the ability to communicate with the outside world. Now, they may not get to do it whenever they want to, or have phone calls or messaging, unlimited, but they are able to maintain contact with their friends and family.
Okay, so do they have, they of course they can't just have a cell phone and text them, but they must have there must be some degree of scrutiny on what they can say or not say to their friends and family. Is that right?
Sure, and actually, some prison facilities, once you get to prison, you do have the ability to message similar to a text message, but you do have to understand that everything that you say, all of the messages are being screened and recorded, and that goes for your phone calls as well. You may be able to talk to friends and family, but unless you're talking to your attorney, all of the communication is screened and recorded.
Okay, so sometimes I think I and a lot of people are basing what we think of as prison on what we've seen in TV shows like Orange is the New Black or Shawshank Redemption or something like that. So I'm sure some of that is realistic and some of it isn't. But one thing you keep seeing, and I always wondered about, is the money. Like, how is money handled in a prison?
Sure. So once you are transported from the county jail and you go through a screening process, so you go to a holding facility and they screen you and, decide what kind of prison you're going to go to in that state. Once all of that has occurred and you are actually transported to the prison, your money follows you. And so you can have friends or family members put money on your books. There's special systems, and it varies from prison to prison, where they can transfer that money, or you can earn money, actually. Granted, you don't earn much more than, say, $1 an hour, but it adds up over time. And so you have the ability to have someone help you put money on your books. You can earn money to put on your books. And then they do actually have special grants and foundations where outside organizations will help you by giving you money to put on your books.
Okay, and you can use that money for buying food and things, as well as, does this somehow connect to your ability to contact your family? Do you have to pay for that like you would with a cell phone plan or something?
Absolutely. That messaging costs money. And yes, you are allowed to, buy what they call commissary goods, where you can get hygiene or, paper, snacks, all of the kind of the things you see on TV. You're able to purchase those at the commissary. And, for people that do have money on their books and they're able to purchase stuff, they're a lot of times able to trade that with other inmates for, services. Say if an inmate can help them do something or teach them something. So, there is that trade market. There's that, definitely that ability where that commissary and what you can buy there is valuable and can be traded with other inmates.
So when someone is in prison for, many years, I sometimes wonder about things like holidays or activities that they can't just be in their cell all of that time. I mean, there must be something like community events and things like that.
Yes, that is true. They do celebrate holidays in the prison. They might have something special on the menu, say for Christmas dinner. They may have programs that are put on by the inmates. They have special religious services. So holidays are not skipped over. You do celebrate them in prison. And they even sometimes extend visiting hours, so friends and family can spend more time with the inmates. The holidays are not ignored, and they do acknowledge them and celebrate them in prison.
So what's a particular ordinary day like for an inmate, say in a federal prison?
Sure, they are. The day is very structured. You lose that freedom or that ability to decide what you do and when you do it. So you get up at the same time every day, you go to bed at the same time every day. There's procedures that you follow when you get up and how you move about the prison. They definitely have things to do. You can enroll in classes, you can even get college courses, and again there are grants and foundations that will help pay for that tuition. So really, it is an opportunity for the inmate to gain some structure, to gain skills that they can use when their sentence is over. And so, some people will thrive in that structure and that routine and get the most out of, the therapy, the counseling, the education, everything that's available. And so your day can have some chances for improvement and opportunity, but breakfast, lunch, and dinner is at a certain time, and everything's structured and routine so that the system will allow as many inmates to coexist and get through the day as there are beds in the prison.
Now, it sounds like what you're saying there about activities that some may look at as being rehabilitation, or education, self-betterment. We like to think that the prison system is helping rehabilitate people who committed crimes. It also sounds like a lot of that is the choice of the prisoner. Like, it's not sort of told that they have to do any of this. It's how motivated, they themselves are toward achieving those goals. Is that about right?
Right. It's just an opportunity for them to accomplish stuff in a very controlled environment if they choose to do that. Now, sometimes it's I've seen judges make it part of their sentence that, they must obtain their GED, for example. Unless there's some sort of exception, some sort of major learning disability, whatever the case may be, and their attorney can, advocate against that as being, impossible, say, for them to accomplish. But a lot of times what they do and how much they are able to complete is up to the inmate. And, there's the opportunity for rehabilitation, but don't ever, look over or forget the fact that this is a very stressful time for them as well. It's a time where a lot of times if they don't get their head right, they, experience a lot of anxiety, depression, and even develop, PTSD, because a prison is not necessarily a friendly place for inmates to coexist.
I would imagine that thing you just said there, the effect on the individual of the environment, might also correspond to some degree with the level of security they're under. So I know there's minimum security, medium security, and maximum security. How do those differ?
Well, that process between the county jail and being transported to the prison they're assigned to, where they get, basically they get screened, and the Department of Corrections looks at the big picture and decides which facility would be most appropriate for them. Now, if you it depends on the person's criminal history, the crime that they are going to be doing the sentence on, and, obviously the more violent, more serious, the higher the security. And the security level reflects the amount of freedoms that they have and the other offenders that they're going to be housed with. So in a maximum security prison, there's, their freedoms are going to be restricted or watched a little bit more, and then they're going to be housed with other dangerous offenders. And so, those lower classifications really are ideal, because you're going to be in a more safe environment if you're in a medium or a low security prison.
I suppose
technically
all three levels probably all have opportunities for growth and rehabilitation. It's just the way they access it, or the amount of access they have to it, might be different.
Right. And it depends state to state as well. This varies greatly from one state to the other, and you can even be sentenced in one state and housed in the prison of another state, just depending on how full that state's prisons are. So there's just a lot of factors and a lot of variables into where you'll go or what the conditions will be like.
So in your experience in seeing clients of yours, I'm sure some end up in prisons. What have you seen in terms of the effect on them when they come out, if you have any contact with them after that?
Sure. Sometimes our clients will check in with us after they're released from prison, or they'll run into members of my staff, and that the devastation to their life, it a lot of times depends on how much support they had going into it. When they go to prison, no one's there necessarily to pay their bills, whether it's their truck payment or their mortgage or their child support, whatever the case may be. And so, when they come out, sometimes they have a big mountain to climb, to get back to where they were prior to going into prison. So it's not ideal. And sometimes the client can prepare for that, and we definitely recommend that they start their preparation if that's a possibility. Obviously we try to avoid that at all costs, but sometimes, the circumstances just are such that we can't avoid that sentence for our clients.
Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that anyone watching this video might have more questions about the prison system. So tell us how they can get to more information and how they might contact you should they need an attorney.
Sure. We will link our blog post in the description, and then they can always call, text, or chat with a member of my team anytime, day or night. Here at Just Criminal Law, we know you only get one shot at justice, so make yours count.